Olá, este é o Poder Entrevista, eu sou o Tiago Mali, editor sênior do Poder 360 e vou entrevistar Ruediger Krech, diretor de Promoção da Saúde da OMS. O Dr. Krech lidera o trabalho da Organização Internacional no controle do álcool e do tabaco e na promoção de atividade física e bem-estar. Há 15 anos na OMS, passou por outras áreas da instituição, sendo também diretor de cobertura universal de saúde e diretor do departamento que cuida de equidade e ética na OMS. Alemão, Krech é graduado em Medicina e Ciência Educacional e tem doutorado em Saúde Pública. A entrevista será feita a partir de agora em inglês. Mr. Krech, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I would like to start our interview asking what's the WHO stand on banning or regulating electronic nicotine device like e-cigarettes right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, let me say that Brazil overall in tobacco control is performing so very well. You're one of the 4 best performing countries in the world. That you're now addressing the issue of e-cigarettes and vaping is really important because we see that as we are quite successful in tobacco control globally, the tobacco industry is trying to recruit our children to use e-cigarettes and vapes. This we can see through their public relations, but also in terms of the devices they put on the market. Thousands of flavors, such as gummy bears and vanilla ice cream, speak to young children. And so in many countries, we see a steep uptake of e-cigarettes and vaping by children as young as 8 years. In some, primary schools, teachers call us to say that they don't know what to do anymore because of the addiction of young children to nicotine, which will be, of course, future smokers in the end. So we are quite worried in WHO about this new market, this emerging market over the last 8-9 years. And we see uptakes of e-cigarettes and vaping in the 100% range in only the last 2 years. So this is an evolving issue, and we've gathered all the evidence in the past 8-9 years to now come up with a strong call for action to governments. And the basic things here are to say that we completely understand if countries would completely ban e-cigarettes and vaping, as you do right now in Brazil. Those countries who have not banned e-cigarettes and vaping should highly regulate the consumption and the access to e-cigarettes and vaping. So you need to ensure that in the end, e-cigarettes do not get into the hands of children and young people. Now, this is difficult, of course, to control because much of the purchases of e-cigarettes and vapes are done through the internet. So while many countries have now introduced stronger regulations on e-cigarettes and vapes, the accessibility and availability, so how it gets to the country and is available to different population groups is a completely different matter because by and large, this is done through the internet. So we urge countries to take this extremely seriously in the regulation they do. We completely understand that member states ban it because that's the safest way, how you can then also control once customs identifies e-cigarettes at the borders and to otherwise regulate it as strong as it can be, as you do with other tobacco products as well.
Can you talk a little bit about what have been these different strategies in terms of regulation or banning e-cigarettes and vapes in different countries? Which ones do you consider right now to have produced the best results, Dr. Krech?
So as I said, there's a serious a number of countries who have banned it. And there's a couple of countries who are considering banning it because they do see that the mere regulation is not counteracting the real uptake of e-cigarettes, especially in these young population groups. There are a couple of countries who believe that it could help some people to quit smoking. And those countries, however, should regulate this not as a consumable, so that it's like a candy bar, but as a medicine. So that would entail that this can only be accessible through pharmacies upon prescription. And of course, then it's important that all the flavors are banned so that these e-cigarettes would not contain any flavors, nor should they be manipulative, right? So the other thing I haven't told you yet is that 95% of these devices can be manipulated in the way the fluid content of the fluid is concerned. So more or less levels of nicotine and the flavors with very different chemicals contained therein, or the voltage of the e-cigarettes and the vapes themselves that you can actually also manipulate yourself. There's even patents held by tobacco industries of those devices that contain a microchip that you can actually link to your iPhone or your smartphone, that can then be manipulated by the industry itself. So the tobacco industry can manipulate then the dosage of nicotine from outside without you knowing. So while so far tobacco industry has not used that patent, they refused, however, to give it up and to withdraw from that patent. So in the future, you never know, that can be done by tobacco industry. So as a regulator, you need to be aware of this as well. Let me just say also one thing. One tactic of the tobacco industry is also to swamp the markets where it's not regulated or regulated also, like in the US, for instance. They swamp the market with ever new devices, 3,000 per month, new devices, while the regulatory authority then needs to regulate one specific device. You cannot regulate all the 3,000 at the same time, but you need to regulate them individually. No regulatory authority is able to do this in due time. So therefore, the industry just sells it on the market, and should the regulatory authority identify a certain health risk in that device, they just pay the penalties. That is one of the strategies, the tactics of the tobacco industry to undermine regulation of e-cigarettes in countries so far.
In Brazil, though it's illegal to sell vapes and e-cigarettes, there are over 2 million users right now. The industry argues that it would be better to lift the ban and regulate the market in order to avoid sanitary concerns and to diminish illegal markets. I wonder, what's your take on this subject, Dr. Krech?
Number one, a lift of the ban will not actually solve the problem of the 2 million devices, at least, that are in your country already, and would not address the problems I just mentioned with regard to unregulated devices being swamping the market and the industry then just paying the penalties, right? So this happens in many countries, and that will not be resolved by lifting a ban and regulating it differently. As I said, if regulation would happen by not regulating it as a consumable, but as a medicine, would mean that you can only access it through a pharmacy without flavors, without the ability of manipulation. The overall problem that you're facing in Brazil, that there are 2 million plus users of e-cigarettes or vapes, can only be resolved by stronger controls. Right, so the customs and the controls at the borders, especially of purchases through the internet, that would be a different approach. You do this with many other things as well that you don't want to see, that are not legal in your country. And of course, by enforcing controls at the customs, would actually solve that problem much better than a lifting of a ban.
One of the things the industry argue is that as we are not, as the e-cigarettes are illegal right now, it's impossible to control better what is inside of them, the substance, and this could lead to more harm. What do you think about that?
As I said, what you put into a regulation is one thing. What the industry puts on the market is a different thing. It ends up again with the control mechanisms that you put in place to actually make the industry accountable for what they put on the market. With lifting a ban, you will have more devices in the market, right? That's for sure, because at the moment it can only come from a foreign country into Brazil. So if you're lifting the ban and you're regulating it differently, I think that the industry will just, implement the same strategy that they put into so many other countries, i.e., to just swamp the market and deal with the consequences later. That's what we see at the moment in the past years, in exactly the huge increase of usage of e-cigarettes in many countries. Right? Again, working together with the customs, the tax, and the authorities, looking at what gets into your country, and therefore to have increased the controls at the borders so that these devices will not actually reach the buyer, and then make the industry accountable for sending devices to a Brazil address. So to put the blame also on the industry, that they can just not send a package, a parcel containing an e-cigarette or vape device to Brazil. So to put the responsibility on the industry will actually decrease the problem.
There is a debate whether e-cigarettes can be a way of quitting smoke. One of the tobacco companies' arguments is that switching regular cigarettes for electronic ones could lead to harm reduction. What's your opinion on this?
First of all, the more we look, the more we find, right? So the more we look into the chemicals, the substances contained in these 3,000 plus liquids that are swamping the market, the more we find in terms of chemicals and toxicants, right? So that's number one. E-cigarettes are harmful. That's to be said. So the industry has often argued with harm reduction. Just think of the whole arguments about filter cigarettes. They said, oh, we're putting filters to cigarettes and that will reduce the harm. That's not true. The evidence shows that filter cigarettes are as harmful as cigarettes, and they are definitely very, very harmful. Right? So this argument of harm reduction is not really usable. Now, what we also see is that very few people really would switch from one product to the other, but most have dual use. That means they're smoking normal cigarettes and they're puffing e-cigarettes at the same time, right? So what is in the interest of the tobacco industry is that we keep and increase the number of nicotine addicted people, right? That's their main concern. And once you're addicted to nicotine, you will actually use whatever is just available, right? And the other thing is, it is definitely a strategy for the tobacco industry to recruit new smokers. Smoking is their main business. And that is not that they let this go. I mean, all this rhetoric about, we're getting tobacco free is nonsense. At the same time, they're, aggressively targeting in countries and specific population groups. And the other thing is that they directly target children, right, who once they are addicted will be addicted for a long time, right? So that is what is behind this whole argument of harm reduction, which is a complete nonsense in this area of public health.
WHO has recently released a report that shows the continuation of a trend of declining tobacco use. On the other hand, there is data, as you mentioned, showing rising numbers of children using e-cigarettes. Do you think that this e-cigarette trend amongst children could harm the tobacco use reduction that we have observed in the last decades?
Yeah, of course. Of course, that's the goal of the tobacco industry. They want their markets back. So we see a total reduction in the last 2 years only of 19 million smokers. You need to look at this with regard to, at the same time, population growth of 149 million people in the world. So having a total reduction of 19 million, where the industry expected a market increase of about 40 million tobacco smokers in the last 2 years, this is really a big success of tobacco control. The tobacco industry, seizes any opportunity to actually interfere with the policies put in place. We see this on a daily scale, right? So, of course, they are targeting our children to be the next generation of tobacco users. That is where actually they see growth, and that is what they have in mind. They want to sell more cigarettes. And they are now witnessing the big 5 tobacco global giants we have are experiencing now a decrease of their share values between 7 and 25% just in the past year. And that is, of course, due to the success in tobacco control. So they are trying to gain that market shares back. And they are seizing any opportunity. And as we just talked about their tactics to actually recruit our children to e-cigarettes and nicotine, making them nicotine dependent, I believe that can be called criminal. So therefore, in the interest of member states, of governments, it must be to protect our people from that surge of tobacco and, of course, these novel products. e-cigarettes.
We are having this year the next session of WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. What do you think we can expect of this next meeting, and if I don't know if there is anything that can be expected specifically on this issue of e-cigarettes?
The member states will discuss the issues of e-cigarettes and vaping amongst many other things, and we just hope that the industry. The industry's tactics will be revealed, will be shown in public what they have in mind. What we also know, however, is that tobacco industries are trying to actually interfere also with government delegations. They are offering to pay the participation of many additional delegates from some countries, especially in the African region, to participate in the Conference of Parties. And then what we, of course, then can expect is that those delegates will speak the rhetoric of the tobacco industry. So we believe that we need to also make that public, that the industry is trying to proactively undermine the governance mechanisms that we have in tobacco control. That is of high concern to us as well.
Dr. Krech, we have reached the end of the interview. I would like to thank you again for your time and to ask you if there is any brief final remark you would like to share with our audience.
So just perhaps to say, you in Brazil, you are doing so well on tobacco control. You have put regulations in place in the way you are selling tobacco products. You are looking at health taxes to increase the prices so that it's that it's contributing to, at least in parts, to the consequences of tobacco consumption in terms of economic costs. You are monitoring your tobacco use very well, and you're helping people to quit smoking. There's so many ways you actually do good things in tobacco control. So I'm very hopeful that you will continue doing the right things also on this novel product such as e-cigarettes and vapes. Thank you very much.
Chega ao final esta edição do Poder Entrevista. Em nome do jornal digital Poder 360, agradeço também a todos os que assistiram a este programa. Esta entrevista foi gravada no estúdio do Poder 360 em Brasília em 17 de janeiro de 2024. Para ficar sempre bem informado, inscreva-se no canal do Poder 360, ative as notificações e não perca nenhuma informação relevante. Muito obrigado e até a próxima.
Poder Monitor, a ferramenta mais completa para monitorar os 3 poderes. Acesse agora poder.cc/monitor e ganhe 30 dias grátis.